Hey guys, Wolvie here. I'm doing a real film. This is part two of the calendar preview for the City of Final Fantasy Opera Amiel Global. Like I said, this is a part two. I am refilming this because I just got done watching Jet Stingred's video on what I want to address here, and he actually made some good points, and I'm by good, excellent, badass points. So and it's like some stuff, I'm like, okay, let me rethink this one out because that way, the if I were to post the original video, I would have been sound like an insensitive asshole. So that's that on that. I do want to give a warning here. I'm going to be swearing a decent deal at the very minimum. Minimum, I should say. Bleh. I need to English. Anyway, the usual disclaimer applies. Any opinion in this video is my opinion and my opinion only. So, this is going to be a particular part in the stream. It was early on. Josh made a statement of sorts regarding the feedback. Vincent first LD, but he didn't mention Balthier, but he did mention Vincent, all that stuff. So. Here's some stuff, from Jet Stinger's video I'm going to put in here. If I am able to, I'll put the description to his video in the description below. I'm going to be leaving a link to the an article from Lexology is a website where they have something on the Japanese law on loot boxes and microtransactions. It's important for me to bring it up here because it does go into what I want to say here. So that's that on that. Anyway, so Josh made a statement early on in yesterday's stream about the community, the aspects of being civil, being nice, that sort of thing, as well as taking feedback from everywhere, the moderators on Discord, etc., etc. Now, what do I agree with that statement? What do I disagree with that statement? Now, the fact that Josh brought it up at all, I'm glad somebody from Square Enix finally said something about that. And the reason why is from a personal story involving yours truly here. Now, there is the City of Final Fantasy Opera Amiel forum. It's super duper small. I don't know if they're active on the website itself anymore. I do know they have a Discord, which I recently left on my own accord. So people were going to be wondering why. The short end of it is that it's for health and life reasons. It is completely unrelated to the game itself. So it's one of those things is where I am slowly getting myself away from the community for my own personal safety, but it's for the reasons of health, related to health and life. I'm not getting any younger. I'm 39. And some people may consider that as somebody being a bit too old to play the game, that sort of thing. So, like I said, I'm glad somebody from Square Enix finally said something about, being civil or whatever to each other. If you can't be nice, just at least be civil. Taking feedback, the moderators on Discord, that sort of thing. So, the story pertaining to me is that on the forum, and this is pre-Discord, is that I was planning on pull on a particular unit, was a main story character, more specifically 7 from Final Fantasy Type 0. She is a massive favorite of mine. Now, one of the moderators kind of replied to my plan and said something along the lines, I should wait till Golbez's global debut. Now, I wound up skipping Golbez's global debut because my understanding of RNG and luck. Now, RNG, some people may not know the acronym, but to most of us, it's the random number generator, meaning that there's it's we don't know how quick or how much resource we need to spend on to get whatever gear. Now, the whole thing with Golbez's event, and 7 might have been considered the troll for that particular event because of what she may or may not be able to do. However, the speed stat, that sort of thing. Now, I was given a suggestion, hold off until Golbez. I actually ignored it, surprisingly. Then there was another topic that came along, and I said something, whatever. And it was the same moderator, started off the reply with, I don't mean to devalue you, being my opinion, but, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of like telling me how I should play DFFOO. And I'm like, I mean, it's just like, I was just taken aback by it then as I still am now. And on Facebook, it's kind of bad. I mean, to give you some of these stories involving me, myself, and I, and this is pertaining to Josh's statement, where I'll get into my more thorough opinion on that a little bit later. So, not much long later, and this is again on Facebook. Facebook, I am under a pseudonym, so yes, again, that's for my own safety, that sort of thing. So it was around Ultimate Leviathan, and the thing is, the timing with Ultimate Leviathan, the global synergy, was a bit too close to a favorite of mine, which is Ultimecia, where with Ultimate Leviathan, there were two characters I don't particularly care for, Kryl and Zell. And I said something along the lines, if it weren't for Ultimecia, I'd be pulling. Kept it simple, that sort of thing. Because Ultimecia is a favorite of mine, Kryl and Zell, not so much. Now, the first reply I got, and the person since has blocked me on Facebook because the lack of responsibility the person took for saying certain things. Now, what the person didn't realize is that there are other opportunities for people to go after certain things, including the EX weapon. So, person number one was like, pull. You don't know if you're going to get another chance. Which is someone who is kind of ill-informed in that regard, because like I just said, there are other opportunities. Things do come back. You just don't know when. Now, fortunately, one of the other replies was actually defending me in the sense of like, yo, so if I'm going to pull on somebody, it's because I like them. I don't want to adhere to the meta for a very good reason. Now, a second person replies, oh, I could get it in 50 tickets. You can too. I'm like, again, I was taken aback by that because, again, the lack of knowing RNG and luck. Some have it good at certain days, others not so much. Now, the whole thing here is that I'm like, okay, this doesn't sound too good. Now, again, another while later, came down to Rosa and Emperor. And the person was like, I managed to get Rosa's EX on tickets with her Lost Chapter banner. And the person who says I could get in at 50 tickets with Kryl assumed that I was going to pull on Emperor. Emperor was one I was originally planning on skipping. Now, under pressure, and this is my own accord, is that I wound up pulling on Emperor, but under pressure from that individual. Now, when it came down to Golbez's Lost Chapter, it's like, that's why I pulled for, Golbez's gear, because, I'm like, hey. Now, I managed to get Golbez's 35 and EX weapon on a free multi. It took me a little bit to get 7's EX weapon. And again, like I said, 7 is a massive favorite of mine. Golbez, he was actually growing on me. But the problem here, like in the Facebook aspect of my story, is that people assume. You can't really assume certain things if you don't know the person's still going to be playing when certain things come back. And the fact that no one really cares about that assumption aspect of the problem this global community has had is making things not so good. So that's the thing on there. Now, recently on Twitter, I mentioned to somebody I'm planning on pulling for Sarah's LD weapon. Now, the reason why I pull on certain banners when I do, it's because it's one less banner in the future I go after. Which is something that people might not understand, is that when some people pull on certain banners at a certain time, it's because they want to save resources later on. Now, for me, I'm glad I skipped Golbez's initial event went after his gear in his lost chapter because I managed to get everything that I wanted, which was, I think I managed to get Laguna's 35 in his lost chapter banner, got Golbez's entire starter kit, including his EX, and 7's EX weapon without using that many resources. It's about knowing when to figuratively pull the trigger on certain banners. Now, the whole thing with Sarah, like I said, I am going after her LD because she is a big favorite of mine. Now, somebody replied, was like, it's ill-advised because Sarah being a burst eligible character due to the fact that she is a sequel protagonist. Now, the thing here is that the fact that the close to the exact words was, it's ill-advised because she's a burst eligible character. Now, the problem with saying something is ill-advised out of the gate and on social media is because it's implying to some that how to play the game, when to pull, and or who to pull. And to say something is ill-advised is that you don't know the person's still going to be playing when certain things come back. And again, the whole thing with Twitter, it is relatively recent. So the reason why I bring up this story about myself personally is, like I said, there are some problems, with the global community, especially those who are global JP hybrids. Now, the whole thing with Josh's statement, again, my story does correlate to that in the sense of stuff that's been said to me on various social media platforms, is that when it comes down to social media, if you're just typing along, or texting, whatever, is that it's much more difficult for people to interpret how you're saying whatever you're saying. Because you really can't tell certain things unless everything is in cap locks. And the thing here is that unless people know you, you can't assume anything. Now, the whole thing with Jet Stinger's video regarding the death threats Josh has gotten over Vincent and LD, whoever done that on Global, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You don't do something that fucking stupid. You're making those who are being more respectful with their criticism look like shit. That's all I had to say about the death threats that Josh got. But there is another side of the problem the global community has had, and it's something I personally need to address right here, right now. And the whole thing with taking the feedback, all that stuff, with Vincent, is just like, Vincent, I felt he kind of needed his LD weapon. For the reason that it's like he gives him some longevity, resolution in sorts. And, I do agree with the whole thing with Vincent getting his LD on Global first. I do agree with it. Granted, it's there's some stuff I'm okay, this could have been better, that could have been better. But I do feel that Vincent, was a worthy candidate for the LD first. Now, I still disagree with Balthier getting his LD first because there's another character who's still at 70/70 on JP to this day. She does not have her LD weapon. She does not have a secondary rework. I'm referring to Fang from Final Fantasy 13. Now, unlike Balthier, Fang has a skill use number total that's less than Balthier's. And Fang would have benefited from the LD more so than Balthier because, unlike Balthier, when it comes down to skill 1, skill 2, and additional ability put together, Fang only has 16 uses. Now, granted, she has some buffs that have a decent duration, but she would have been benefiting from that more. And there were some requests for Fang around Ultimate Odin on Global last September when it came down to the synergy period. And it's like some people, when people say they listen to feedback, it's like one has to look at who has gotten what on Global early more often. If you look at Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy 15, the latter is on the top 10 for Final Fantasy copies, like the number of copies sold. So Final Fantasy 15 is on the top 10. Final Fantasy IX, I had to double check. I don't think so, but you look at Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy 13 has actually sold more than Final Fantasy IX, if memory serves me correctly. But when it comes down to Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy IX, those two own the top 2 spots for things that have come to global earlier than the other entries. If you look at Final Fantasy VII, it's like they may be in the equation of stuff that's come out to global early. Maybe. Not definite. You look at Final Fantasy XII, you look at Balthier, who's made a guest appearance in Final Fantasy Tactics. So it's one of those things, it's like where if they're listening to the feedback, are they listening to everybody? And the people who are giving feedback, are they even being respected? It's a bit of a multitude where I felt part of Josh's statement came too late, because you look at the total number of downloads between global and JP, which is at 9 million. There are other games who have the numbers in spades. And again, the numbers don't lie. Now, one of the other problems I've noticed with the global community is the fact that this is including my story, is that the opinions are getting devalued. And it's not just by those who are constantly complaining and whining about certain things, but it's also those who are blindly defending every last decision. Now, those who are blindly defending decisions are kind of, in a way, are silencing those who are making valid criticism in a respectful way. Now, for those who are blindly defending things, you are just as much of the problem as those who are whining. Now, when it comes down to global first stuff, I don't think global should have any more global first stuff personally. Now, part of it is because the whole aspect of people whining and the death threat sending, but it's also, the favoritism that people are saying that's not there. It kind of is, because you're looking at the requests of certain things, and to be more specific for 9 and 15, you have Kuja's global first was early. You have Beatrix being a global first character. You have Vivi LD first. Now, I will say this, I do feel that right call was made for Vivi being LD first for global. That's that. So you have at least 3 instances where somebody from Final Fantasy IX got the treatment on global early. Now, if you look at Final Fantasy 15, RNA global first. You also have Noctis's EX realization came kind of early as a result of that. And it's like, if you look at JP, you have practically everybody on the 15 roster thus far with their LD weapons. Now, if you look at the sales aspect of things, it's like, yeah, 15 is a top 10. You have to also look at Final Fantasy 14, who's getting another addition to their game. And if memory serves me correctly, the addition Final Fantasy 14 is getting is probably going to be wrapping up that game altogether. And 14 is in the top 10. Yet, you don't see much love for 14 despite that fact. And I've seen the trailer for the final edition. I think it is the final edition to 14. And it's called Endwalker, I think it is. And I know it features the twins. So, with that bit out of the way, just an overall note, Josh, kudos to you for what you said about everything regarding, the civility and the niceness. I will keep it real here and say this. Not everybody is going to be nice. There are some people who will also refuse to keep things civil. So, to those who are whining about certain things, you just made the global community look like shit. However, those who are blindly defending the decisions Square Enix has been making for DFFOO, you are just as much of the problem. Because defending certain things silences those who actually have valid criticism, valid feedback to give. And how does a game improve if there's no feedback able to be given because of the white knights blindly defending the game? Now, there are minorities who are defending the game blindly, and there are minorities that are bitching and whining about the game. And when I say minorities, like the groups themselves, I should say. There are like a small number who are blindly defending the game. There are a small number who are bitching and whining and complaining. So it's a matter of, it's better to be respectful than to be nice to everybody. Because again, not everybody's going to be nice to you. I've learned that the very hard way. For me, I'd rather keep things civil and respectful because honestly, as long as the point comes across, that's all that matters. But the whole thing with that message, I have to keep it real, that came a little bit too late because looking at the numbers, we're nowhere near the numbers for certain other games. Now, granted, DFFOO is quite generous, but you can't really translate that generosity if the RNG and luck is not in your favor. And the percentages, I do have to correct you, Jet. I actually have to correct you a little bit. So that quote-unquote 10%, that is per multi-pull. That's not per ticket pull. That's not per single pull in the sense of like 500 gems are free single pulls, whatever. So it's like that percentage is per multi-pull because you have the 10% for 15 and 35. That's per multi-pull. EX is at 7. LD is at 5. And the burst is at 3% per multi-pull. Because some of the singular numbers are extremely smaller. So there's a slight correction on that. Like I said, I'll have a link to Jet Stingrad's video on the matter in the description below, alongside the Lexology bit, because JP, I do have to admit it, they are a little bit more generous because of, in my personal opinion, the laws they have on loot boxes and microtransactions. So that's that on that. I'm done with this video. Oh, and I'm out of here. With Wolfie here signing off, I will catch you all on the flip side.